Alright, this happened a couple of years ago when I was living alone for the first time. I had just moved into this small, old apartment downtown. It was one of those buildings that had character. You know, the kind with creaky floors and walls that seemed to carry sound in strange ways. At first, I was excited to have my own place, but after a while, the constant quiet started to get to me. But I figured that was just part of living alone, right? You get used to it. It was a Friday night, and I had decided to stay in. My friends had invited me out, but I wasn't really feeling up for it. I just wanted a night to myself to unwind after a long week. I ordered a pizza, grabbed a couple of beers, and settled in for a movie marathon. I remember it was raining outside, which made the whole apartment feel extra cozy. The sound of the rain against the windows was kind of soothing, and I was really getting into my movie. Around 10 p.m., I heard this weird noise. At first I thought it was just the wind, or maybe some pipes clanging, but it was this faint scratching sound, like something brushing against the wall. I paused the movie and listened. It was so quiet that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. But then it happened again, a soft, irregular scraping noise, like something moving slowly along the outside of the building. I got up and walked to the window, pushing aside the curtains to look outside. The street was empty, just wet from the rain, and there was no one around. I could see the trees swaying a little in the wind, but nothing that could explain the noise. I shrugged it off, thinking it was probably just some animal, or maybe the building settling. I went back to my spot on the couch and tried to get back into the movie. But then, about 15 minutes later, it started again. This time, it sounded like it was coming from the kitchen. It was that same scratching noise, only now it was louder, more deliberate. It was like someone was dragging their fingers along the wall or maybe the cabinets. I paused the movie again and listened. My heart was starting to race a little, but I kept telling myself it was nothing, just some weird house noise. I got up and went to the kitchen, flipping on the light. The noise stopped the second I walked in. I looked around, checking the cabinets and even the window to see if something had gotten inside, but everything looked normal. The window was shut tight and there was no sign of anything out of place. I stood there for a minute, just listening, but the noise was gone. I felt this weird chill run down my spine, but I tried to shake it off. I went back to the living room, trying to act like everything was fine, but I couldn't focus on the movie anymore. I kept glancing toward the kitchen, waiting for the noise to start up again. About an hour later, I decided to call it a night. I turned off the TV, cleaned up the kitchen, and got ready for bed. I double-checked all the locks on the doors and windows, just to be sure. Then went into my bedroom and shut the door. I figured I was just being paranoid, maybe letting my imagination get the best of me. I got into bed and tried to relax, but every little noise seemed amplified in the silence of the apartment. I lay there for what felt like hours, just staring at the ceiling, listening for anything out of the ordinary. I finally started to drift off when I heard it again. This time, it was a loud thump, like something heavy had fallen in the living room. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it toward the bedroom door. The apartment was dead silent again, and I couldn't hear anything moving. I got up, my hands shaking, and slowly opened the door, peeking out into the hallway. I crept into the living room, shining the light around. Everything looked exactly the way I had left it. The door was still locked, and nothing seemed out of place. But I had definitely heard something. I stood there for a minute, listening, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no scratching, just the sound of my own breathing. I went back to my room, trying to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I got back into bed, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, it was morning. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept replaying the noises in my head, trying to figure out what they could have been. I tried to act normal, went about my day, and even went out to meet some friends for coffee, but I couldn't get rid of this uneasy feeling. That night, I was sitting in the living room again, trying to distract myself with a book. I had all the lights on because the apartment felt too dark and oppressive otherwise. Around midnight, I heard the scratching again. This time it was coming from the hallway, right outside my bedroom door. I froze, my heart racing. I put the book down and listened. Every muscle in my body tensed up. The scratching was slow and steady, like someone was dragging their nails across the wall. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, but I didn't get up. I just sat there, staring at the hallway, trying to figure out what to do. The noise continued for a few more seconds, and then it stopped. The silence was almost worse than the noise itself. I got up, my heart pounding in my chest, and walked to the hallway. I shone the light around, but there was nothing there. The walls were bare. No scratches, no marks, nothing. I checked the front door, but it was still locked. I even looked through the peephole into the hallway outside, but it was empty. I felt this wave of fear wash over me, and I had to sit down to keep from freaking out. I didn't know what was happening, but it was starting to feel like I was being messed with. I went back to the living room and sat on the couch, trying to calm down. I kept telling myself it was nothing, maybe some animal in the walls or the pipes making noise, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I stayed up for hours, listening, waiting for the noise to come back, but it didn't. The apartment was silent again, and I was too scared to go to bed. I finally dozed off on the couch, waking up to the sunlight streaming through the windows. I felt exhausted, like I hadn't slept at all. I decided to get out of the apartment for a while, just to clear my head. I spent most of the day out, trying to avoid going back home. When I finally got back to the apartment that evening, I felt that same uneasy feeling as soon as I walked in. It was like the air was thick, heavy, like something was waiting for me. I went through my usual routine, double-checking all the locks and windows before sitting down in the living room. I tried to distract myself with another movie, but I was on edge the entire time. Every little noise made me jump. I kept glancing at the hallway, half expecting to see something standing there. Around 11 p.m., I heard the scratching again. This time it was coming from the front door. My heart sank. I muted the TV and listened. The scratching was soft but deliberate, like someone was trying to get in. I got up, my hands shaking, and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to decide what to do. I didn't want to open the door, but I had to know what was making that noise. I slowly unlocked the door and opened it a crack, peeking into the hallway. There was nothing there. The hallway was empty, just like before. I stepped out, looking around, but there was no one. I felt this wave of relief wash over me, but at the same time, I was more freaked out than ever. What was going on? I went back inside, locking the door behind me, and sat down on the couch. I was shaking, my mind racing. I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat there, listening, waiting for the scratching to start again, but it didn't. The next day, I called a friend and told them what had been happening. They offered to come over and stay the night with me, and I was so relieved. They came over that evening, and we stayed up late, talking and watching movies. I felt a lot better with someone else there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. We didn't hear any noises that night, and I started to think that maybe it was all in my head. But even now, when I'm alone in that apartment, I can't help but listen for it, that faint scratching that made my skin crawl. I don't know what it was, and maybe I'll never know, but it's something I'll never forget. There was this one time I was home alone that still gives me the chills when I think about it. It was a regular weekend. My parents had gone away to visit some relatives, and my older brother was at his girlfriend's place. I had the whole house to myself, which I usually loved. No one telling me to clean up or turn the music down, just complete freedom. The day was pretty uneventful. I slept in late, made myself a lazy breakfast, just some cereal, nothing fancy, and then lounged around the house. I remember I spent most of the day just watching TV and playing video games, the usual stuff. Around 6 p.m., I decided to order some pizza. The sun was setting, and it was starting to get dark outside. I didn't mind. In fact, I kind of liked it. There was something comforting about being in the house while it was dark outside, like I was in my own little world. The pizza arrived, and I grabbed it from the delivery guy, making sure to lock the door after him. That's something I always do. Lock the door right after I close it. Just a habit I've picked up. I took the pizza into the living room, put on a movie, and just relaxed. It was one of those cheesy horror movies that you watch just to laugh at how ridiculous they are. The kind where the characters make every bad decision possible. I remember thinking, If I were in that situation, I'd definitely know what to do. Little did I know, the night was about to get way more intense than I ever expected. It was around 9 p.m. when I first noticed something weird. I was halfway through my second movie when I thought I heard a faint noise coming from upstairs. It was like a soft thud, like something had fallen over. I paused the movie and just listened for a second, straining to hear anything else. But everything was quiet again. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I just imagined it or it was the house settling. Our house is pretty old, so it makes noises like that all the time, especially at night. I went back to my movie, but I couldn't quite shake this uneasy feeling that was starting to creep in. About half an hour later, I heard it again. This time, it was louder, like something heavy being dragged across the floor above me. My heart skipped a beat, and I paused the movie again, sitting there in the dark living room, just listening. I was starting to get really nervous. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe the neighbors were moving furniture or something, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The sound was coming from inside the house. I stood up, trying to stay calm, and grabbed my phone. I didn't want to call anyone yet because I didn't want to seem like I was freaking out over nothing. I decided to check it out myself first. So I turned on the flashlight on my phone and started walking toward the stairs. I went up the stairs as quietly as I could, each step creaking under my weight. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel a cold sweat starting to form on my forehead. I reached the top of the stairs and stood there for a moment, listening again. The hallway was dark, and all the bedroom doors were closed. I decided to check my parents' room first, so I slowly pushed the door open and shone the light inside. Everything seemed normal. The bed was made, nothing out of place. I moved on to my brother's room next. Same thing. Everything looked untouched. Then I went to my room. I pushed the door open, expecting to see everything just as I had left it. But when I shined the light around, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My closet door was open, just a crack, but I knew for a fact that I had closed it earlier. I always close my closet door before bed. It's just one of those things I do. I stood there for a second, frozen, just staring at the door. My mind was racing. Did I accidentally leave it open? Or had someone else been in here? I took a deep breath and walked over to the closet, reaching out to push the door open. I shone the flashlight inside, expecting to see, I don't know what, but it was empty. Just my clothes and some boxes piled up on the floor. I let out a shaky breath and closed the closet door, making sure it clicked shut. I was about to leave the room when I heard another noise. This time, it was coming from downstairs. It sounded like something had fallen over in the kitchen. My heart started racing again, and I felt a lump form in my throat. I crept back down the hallway, down the stairs, and toward the kitchen. I turned the corner and shined my light into the room. My blood ran cold when I saw what had happened. One of the chairs from the kitchen table was lying on its side on the floor. I knew for a fact that I hadn't left it like that. Someone had been in here. I backed out of the kitchen, trying to stay calm. I needed to think. My first instinct was to call the police, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. What if it was just some kind of accident? What if I was just being paranoid? I went back into the living room and sat down on the couch, trying to figure out what to do. That's when I heard it, a soft creak, like a floorboard shifting under someone's weight, coming from the hallway behind me. My blood turned to ice. There was no mistaking it this time. Someone was in the house with me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I whispered to the operator, telling them I thought someone was in my house, that I was hiding in the living room. They told me to stay on the line and stay as quiet as possible. They said they were sending someone over right away. I sat there, clutching the phone, every nerve in my body on high alert. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and shaky. I was terrified. I kept listening for more sounds, but the house had gone silent again. The operator stayed on the line with me, trying to keep me calm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the front door creak open. I jumped, thinking it was the intruder, but then I heard voices, deep, authoritative voices, the police. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but I didn't move. I was too scared to even breathe. I heard them call out, announcing themselves as they moved through the house. They checked every room, every closet, every corner. They finally found me sitting on the couch, shaking like a leaf. They told me they didn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry. Nothing out of place except for the chair in the kitchen. I felt a mixture of relief and frustration. I knew what I'd heard. I knew that chair hadn't fallen over on its own, but there was no one there, and no explanation for the noises. They took a quick report and left, telling me to call if anything else happened. After they left, I locked all the doors and windows again, checked the entire house myself, just to be sure. I went back upstairs to my room, still feeling uneasy. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound made me jump, and I kept replaying the events in my head, trying to make sense of it all. The next morning, I told my parents what happened when they called to check in. They were concerned, but figured it was probably just my imagination. Maybe a stray animal got in and knocked the chair over. But I know what I heard. I know someone was in the house with me that night. To this day, I still don't know what really happened. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But every time I'm home alone, I can't help but think back to that night and wonder if someone was really there, watching me. Alright, so this happened a while back when I was living alone in this small apartment on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't a fancy place, just a cozy little one-bedroom unit in an older building. The rent was cheap, and it was close enough to my work, so it seemed perfect at the time. You know, just a quiet spot to crash after a long day. I wasn't really the type to get spooked easily, but after that night, things changed. It was a Friday night, and I was looking forward to just having a chill evening. My week had been hectic, so I figured I'd just stay in, order some food, and maybe catch up on a show or two. My friends were out of town, so I had the whole night to myself. Honestly, I was kind of excited about it, having some peace and quiet for once. I ordered a pizza and sat up on the couch with my laptop. I had my playlist going, just enjoying the solitude. Everything was normal at first. I was halfway through an episode of this crime series when I heard a noise. At first I thought it was part of the show, but then I realized it was coming from somewhere else. It was this soft, muffled thumping sound, like something was hitting the wall or the floor. It was faint, but enough to catch my attention. I paused the show and just sat there, listening. The sound came again, and it seemed to be coming from the apartment next door. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe my neighbor had dropped something or was moving furniture. It wasn't that unusual to hear random noises in the building. The walls were pretty thin, but then a few minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it was louder and more deliberate, like someone was knocking on the wall, but not in a rhythmic way, just random taps and bangs. I started to feel a bit uneasy. It was almost 11 p.m., and I hadn't heard my neighbors making any noise before now. I decided to ignore it and went back to my show, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling, like something wasn't right. The thumping continued intermittently, and each time it happened, it seemed to be getting closer, like it was moving from one side of the apartment to the other. That's when I started to get really freaked out. I turned off the TV and sat there in silence, trying to pinpoint where the noise was coming from. It stopped for a while, and I thought maybe it was over, but then I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a scraping sound, like something hard being dragged across the floor, and it was coming from right outside my door. My heart was pounding in my chest. I got up slowly and tiptoed over to the door. I pressed my ear against it, trying to hear what was going on. The scraping sound continued, slow and deliberate, like someone was dragging something heavy down the hallway. I couldn't bring myself to look through the peephole. I was too scared of what I might see. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing with all sorts of thoughts. Was it someone trying to break in? Was it a prank? I didn't know what to do. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my finger hovering over the call button. But then the scraping stopped. Just like that, it was dead silent again. I waited for a few minutes, my ear still pressed to the door, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no more scraping, just silence. I put my phone down, feeling a mix of relief and confusion. I didn't know if I should open the door and check, or just pretend nothing happened. Finally, I mustered up the courage to look through the peephole. My hands were shaking as I leaned forward, peering into the hallway. It was empty, just the dimly lit corridor stretching out in both directions. I stood there for a while, just staring, trying to make sense of what was going on. I went back to the couch, but I didn't turn the TV back on. I just sat there, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. Every little noise made me jump. The creaking of the building, the hum of the refrigerator, everything sounded so loud in the silence. About an hour later, I heard the noise again. This time it was different. It was a soft clicking sound, like someone was fiddling with the door handle. My eyes went wide and I felt this rush of panic. I didn't move, just sat there, holding my breath. The clicking continued for a few seconds, and then I heard a faint creak, like the door was being pushed against. I grabbed my phone, ready to call for help, but then the noise stopped again. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly, and crept over to the door. I looked through the peephole again, but there was no one there, just the empty hallway. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I decided to open the door. I guess I just needed to know if someone was messing with me. I slowly turned the lock and opened the door a crack, peeking out. The hallway was still empty, but there was this weird feeling in the air, like something was off. I stepped out into the hallway, looking around, but there was nothing, no signs of anyone. I stood there for a minute, my heart pounding in my ears, and then went back inside, locking the door behind me. I double-checked the lock, making sure it was secure. I went to bed that night feeling uneasy, but I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe just some prank or my imagination running wild. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I lay there in the dark, listening to every little sound, waiting for something to happen. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to another noise. This time, it was a soft tapping sound, like fingers drumming against the window. My bedroom was on the second floor, so there was no way someone could be outside the window. I turned on the light and sat up, my eyes glued to the window. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate, like someone was trying to get my attention. I got out of bed and slowly walked over to the window, my heart racing. I pulled back the curtain just a bit, enough to peek outside. There was nothing there, just the empty street below, bathed in the glow of the streetlights. I let the curtain fall back into place, feeling more scared than ever. I went back to bed, but I didn't turn off the light. I just sat there, hugging my knees to my chest, listening. The tapping had stopped, but I still felt like I wasn't alone. The rest of the night was a blur. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of my phone ringing. It was my friend calling to check in, and I was so relieved to hear their voice. I didn't tell them everything that happened. I didn't want to sound crazy, but just talking to someone made me feel a little better. I spent the rest of the weekend at a friend's place, too freaked out to stay in the apartment alone. When I finally went back, I was still on edge. I checked every room, every closet, making sure there was nothing out of place. I never figured out what those noises were, and I never heard them again after that night. But to this day, I still get chills thinking about it. Whatever it was, it made me realize that sometimes the scariest things are the ones you can't see, the things that go bump in the night and leave you wondering if you're really alone.